I want to welcome all of you to Cadre Talk, and my name is Dawn Penfold, and I'm president of Meeting Jobs, which recently partnered with Cadre. First, a bit about Cadre Talk. We have developed this series as an opportunity for you to grab a cup of coffee, which I have, and take a short break out of your day. Mark your calendar for every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we'll have a 30-minute conversation with an industry expert on a variety of topics. Our goal at Cadre in Meeting Jobs is to give all the meeting and event professionals an opportunity to learn something new in this conversation, even if it's just one takeaway. So before we get started, let me share a bit about who we are. Cadre is a very cool platform and a service offering a compliant, and the key word here I think is compliant, gig economy freelancer staffing model. Think about a platform for event staff and independent contractors like Uber or LinkedIn with a marketing opportunity like Google. Bottom line, if you're a hiring event professional, virtual event staff, or a longer-term meeting or event project professional, Cadre is your source for you to find that talent that's affordable and compliant. If you're a gig worker in our industry, this is your go-to place to find work. In fact, for gig workers and independent contractors, right now, Cadre is offering a 50% discount on the required background check, so don't hesitate. Then on the other hand, we have Meeting Jobs, and Meeting Jobs offers an industry-specific job board, as well as services in retained search and resume pre-qualification services for events and meetings industry. So together, Cadre and Meeting Jobs provides a full complement of labor resources across the hiring spectrum, from full-time planners to project-based contract planners to event staff. So you can visit us at hirecadre.com and meetingjobs.com. Next week, we hope you'll join us where Todd Toronto, president of Cadre, will be hosting an influential business leader in our industry, Ralph Weaver, founder and CEO of East-West Connection. The conversation will be going from pause to play on events and when can we restart. So now a few housekeeping notes. Everyone is muted and we're not seen, so need to throw on that extra makeup or make sure that you're presentable from the waist up. You are encouraged to ask questions using the Q&A area. Here we go. Let me tell you about today's guest. And a shout out to Betty Garrett at Garrett Speakers International for introducing Melissa to us. Melissa Majors, CEO of Melissa Majors Consulting, is an innovator and optimizer of education, inclusion, and leadership strategies. She has dedicated her career to maximizing the business impact associated with these areas of focus. Her team has a proven reputation for driving better business outcomes through the innovative and inclusive strategic planning. They bring deep expertise in improving profitability and innovation, boosting organizational performance, and optimizing inclusion strategies. Melissa formerly studied strategy and innovation at Harvard University. Melissa Majors is a crowd-pleasing speaker who masters brain-friendly talks that engage her audiences and spark not just from inspiration, but action. Melissa is featured in publications such as Forbes magazine, as well as so many of our industry publications. And I have to say, in prepping for this program specifically, I was constantly finding a reason to reach out to her. Every time I got off the phone with her or read an email from her, I learned something. I felt smarter. I learned something more about myself. Go figure. If I had a dinner party with smart, introspective people, Melissa, I think you would have a seat at that table.
Well, thank you, Dawn.
I want to start. You just published your book just a couple of days ago, right?
It's out. It's ready for pre-order, and on Monday, May the 3rd, is when it officially publishes.
Okay. I had the opportunity to listen to the first chapter, and it's called The 7 Simple Habits of Inclusive Leaders, which is a guilt-free guide on how to boost innovation and performance by involving others equally. It blew me away. And what motivated you to write it?
Well, thank you so much for that. It's exciting and it's a labor of love, but I have to tell you that, Dawn, I've cracked the code, and I say this humbly. I have cracked the code on how to be an inclusive leader and involve others equally. So I've been around, Dawn. I mean, I've been in a lot of different industries. I've been in insurance, banking, technology, professional services, associations. I've been around. And I'm so honored to share that in all of the businesses that I've led, I've achieved double-digit growth. And the reason for my success is because I'm innovative. But the reason why I'm innovative is I've been inclusive. Now, so being inclusive truly has been an unfair advantage for me. I have to share, though, what my background is, which causes me probably to be more of an inclusive leader than others. My parents I'm mixed. My mother is white, my father is Black. Dawn, they got married in 1969. That was only 2 years after it was legal on a federal level for an interracial couple to get married. So imagine the scandal when they got married. They eloped. They didn't tell anybody. They went off and eloped and notified my white grandparents, my grandma and grandpa, that they got married on a postcard. And no lie, Dawn, when my grandfather flipped over that postcard and read the note that his oldest daughter had married a Black man, he had a massive heart attack and he almost died. And it was on his almost deathbed that his minister came to him and just begged him, if you make it through this heart attack, you at least need to meet this man. And so I'm happy to share about 6 months later, my grandfather met my father. And for the first time, Dawn, my grandfather connected on a human level with a Black person. And he realized how wrong he had been, that all these perceptions he had built up in his mind were demystified because he discovered my father was just a good, hardworking man who loved his daughter. And so he made my parents promise that when they had children, they would be intentional about exposing us to diversity. And so my parents took that promise very seriously and exposed me to people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds. And it's that upbringing, that intentionality around that benefited me, not only on a personal level, because honey, I can dance to any song that comes on the music on the dance floor, anything, but it benefited me from a business perspective. And so now as a leadership strategist and teacher, I try to help other leaders recognize how they can get past their brains and involve others equally, which is more than just a moral need, it's a business imperative. And my purpose on this earth is to educate others. It's my gift, it's my life's purpose. And so writing this book was part of my work to help make sure that leaders were enabled to do that.
How did you choose what should go into this book? Because I'm sure there are so many things, factors that were brought into it.
Absolutely. Great question. So I had my personal experiences, but that wasn't enough. I'm a studier of great leaders. I love great leadership. And so I launched some research to understand, what do savvy and really good leaders do to involve others equally? Like, why do they do it and how do they do it? And I discovered that their behavior falls into 7 different categories of actions. And so taking those actions and helping people understand the why and the how is how I chose what made it into the book.
I know. When did you start writing this book? I mean, how long did it take you to put this together?
That's a great question.
I bet years.
Actually, it happened right after I met Betty Garrett. And that was about a year and a half ago. And I said, Betty, I've got this great leadership philosophy. I want to get it out to the world. And she says, well, how you doing on your book? I said, I'm not writing a book. She says, well, girl, get your bleep together and write that book. So I started writing my book.
If anybody knows Betty, you know what the bleep was too.
You know what the bleep was. So anyway, I started writing this book, and it took, in its entirety, it took me about a year playing around with it. But then I got really serious and I just dove in and got addicted to it. And in about 90 days, I cranked out this book and then started the whole editing and publishing process.
You know, I'm thinking back to you when you originally spoke, you know, the fact that the parental influence that you had was amazing. And there were, what, 9 of you, right?
Youngest of 9 kids. Now, here's a story that you don't know, Dawn. Let me share this one. My mother is such an incredible woman. My father was married twice. So my mom is his second wife. The first time he was married to a woman, a Black woman. She was a severe alcoholic. She was raped as a child, couldn't get over it, and that just manifests itself into alcoholism. She ended up abandoning the family. My white mother stepped in and raised us all together. So we don't make the distinction between half brothers and sisters. We are all one family. So yes, I come from really great roots.
That's great. Now, you're quoted saying inclusion, and I want to read this. Inclusion is more than a moral obligation. Okay, I'm going to do it because a bling came in on my computer. Inclusion is more than a moral obligation. It's a business imperative. Tell me more about that philosophy.
So there's been studies by McKinsey and Company. They're a really big consulting research firm. They've been comparing the bottom line impact of the most inclusive companies compared to the least inclusive companies for many, many years now. And what they discovered is that the most inclusive companies are outperforming the least inclusive companies by 49% higher profitability. That's a huge competitive advantage. And I also watch so many leaders who struggle to operationalize inclusion into everything they do and miss out on that business advantage because they see inclusion and being more diverse as a moral obligation. And I know this isn't popular, Dawn, but it's true. All of our morals are different. I mean, look no further than the political landscape in the United States. How I define what's right, how you define what's right is all individual. And so organizations and leaders who base their why on a moral obligation set themselves up for inaction and a lack of buy-in and support. Whereas organizations who steep their why to be more inclusive in the business case, it's much more sticky, it's less likely to get deprioritized, and they find business reasons to integrate it and get more people to buy into why they need to be more inclusive. That's why it's more than a moral obligation. It's a business imperative. And the globalized economy in which we work, our customers are more diverse. They have different unique needs. Our workplaces are more diverse. Your peers and colleagues come from various backgrounds. So we've got to find ways of working with people equally and really empathizing with their diverse perspectives.
Okay, well, I'm going to jump over to my knowledge base, which is hiring. And I'm dealing with hiring officials almost on a daily basis. And everybody thinks they're inclusive. They really do. I mean, I really think deep down they think they're inclusive. But when I'm dealing with hiring officials, they always talk about the right fit. They always talk about, I want to hire the right fit. My job at Meeting Job is to maybe give them the right resume. And I've said to them, now you make the fit. And what's happening, what I'm seeing from you is maybe the right fit, that square peg in that square hole is not the right fit after all. Can you elaborate for a long time? And I just want to go, yeah, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about what I'm feeling on that.
Absolutely. Well, based on my research, one of the areas where inclusive leaders recognize that's been a stumbling block for them is in hiring decisions. So many of them admitted that they would hire based on gut instinct versus on rational logic. And they ended up hiring people who would fit in well with the rest of the team. Mm-hmm. So I'll ask your viewers right now, nobody's going to see your answer. What do you prioritize most during the hiring process? Is it people who will get along well with the rest of the team or people who bring a diverse background? If you chose people who get along well with the rest of the team, you are in good company because 68% of people hire for team fit and camaraderie. But here's the problem with that. You end up building teams of people who look and think a lot like each other. They end up being a homogeneous team. And Management and Science in 2013 did a study comparing what's the difference in performance between homogeneous teams and diverse teams. And what they discovered is that homogeneous teams, there's pressure to get along, not rock the boat, not to share a contrarian viewpoint. They make decisions faster, but they're lower performing because they're less innovative and there's less critical thinking because of lack of diverse perspectives. Whereas diverse teams are much higher performing, they're less likely to trust each other so much. They have more conflict because their diverse perspectives all merging together in one. But they're higher performing, they're more innovative, and they're making a much higher bottom line impact because there's enhanced critical thinking. So the question is this: during the hiring process and your company, you have to ask yourself this question: do I want to be comfortable or do I want to be high performing? And if you choose high performing, you have to be intentional about hiring for diversity so that you get to benefit from those diverse perspectives, thus leading to inclusive outcomes, better decisions, and more critical thinking. That is how it happens and the why behind it, Dawn.
It's interesting because my mind has gone in two directions. And one direction is the fact that as things gear up, we're going to run into an explosion of meetings in 4 or 5 months. And people are going to start hiring back and they're going to say, I don't want to train. I need somebody who knows what they're doing. And again, so that is the facet of the job where they can do the job. But you're also talking fit is how people think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you comment on that? Because people will say, I don't have time to train. I don't have time to mentor.
Yep. Absolutely. There isn't, just because someone is different doesn't mean they aren't trained. What happens is we see people who, and this is how our brains work. I'm going to drop a big old dirty secret right here on this talk. Okay, Dawn?
Mm-hmm.
Our brains haven't evolved that much since we were hanging out in caves. I mean, it's true. Like, we are still wired for reproduction and survival all the time. And so our brain is constantly scanning the environment for opportunities to pass on their genes or save our lives. And so one of the things it looks for is patterns of people, because if you are more familiar to me, you're less likely to be a threat. And so in the hiring process, our brains get in the way and said, oh, that candidate is more likely to be trustworthy, more qualified, because they're more the same than different. And so the biases on our brain get in the way, and we actually miss out on well-qualified candidates who also bring diversity and those innovative perspectives to the table, because our hiring processes may have bias in them, and certainly our brains get in the way as well.
Yeah, great. And then the other direction that I was going to go in was that when last March, when everything went boom or kaboom, more, when they went kaboom. Right. And then all of a sudden we were retrenching, we were reinventing our industry. And this is where the innovation that you're speaking of came in, where people had to say, what we normally did isn't working anymore. We've got to come up with a new way.
That's right.
And do you think that companies that had that more innovative approach or inclusive approach succeeded more than those that just kind of panicked?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt, the companies who had more diverse perspectives at the table were able to pivot, innovate, and solve some of these very complex challenges that we're facing, uncharted territory. It is the blending of diverse perspectives. In the middle of that is where we discover real innovation. Give me just a second to tell you a quick story about Tabasco, how this proves the point. A couple of years ago, Tabasco, their sales were in the toilet. I mean, they were in really bad revenue shape, and they needed to solve for the sales problem. So they came up with a series of really funny, clever ads, marketing campaign to solve the sales problem. Well, guess what? It didn't work. And so one day, the CEO of Tabasco was on the manufacturing floor complaining about this lackluster, cool brand campaign that didn't work. And one of the managers on the manufacturing floor said, well, why don't you just make the hole bigger? And so, for those of you who like hot sauce for a while, it used to be really hard to get the Tabasco out of the bottle. Well, not so much anymore because the hole is bigger. And so how that relates to innovation is what happened in the first place. The same cast of characters sat around the same boardroom, swirling around the same unoriginal ideas, and didn't get to benefit from the diverse perspectives. Whereas if they had included more people in the problem-solving process, they could have saved themselves a lot of time and money. And that's just a funny little short story on how diverse perspectives lead to unique ideas. And it's those unique ideas that are critical during times when we really need to reinvent ourselves, like what happened to us a year ago.
Wow. Okay. So here's the test for me. I've always considered myself very inclusive. I mean, I'm liberal, I'm accepting of all. And as I mentioned before, I socialize around all the people that agree with me. And we call them like-minded people. And then all of a sudden, after hearing your first chapter, I thought, I'm not inclusive at all. So I felt so guilty about it. I felt, oh my God, how am I going to get over this? Because I always thought I was inclusive. So there were a couple things. One is, do I have to change all my social friends around? And how do I get rid of the guilt? How do I get over this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll answer it in two parts. One with a story about my husband. I love my husband. I have a crush on him after being married for 10 years, studly firefighter, great husband, great father. It's fantastic. But he gets on my nerves because he's an absolute news junkie. Well, here's what he does. One night he was listening to Fox News, flip back to CNN, watch Fox News, flip back to CNN. And I said, will you just pick a channel already? You're driving me crazy. And he said, Melissa, these news channels are biased. And I really want to know what happened. And so if I listen to both of them, the truth is somewhere in the middle. And so that's why it's so important to plug into different people who agree with different things. Now, as it relates to our social circles, Dawn, your social circles are a lot like the favorite news channel that you plug in. They're likely biased. And if we're more honest, then we can agree that, to your point, your social circle is likely more segregated than it is integrated, which means you find yourself surrounded by like-minded people who look and think a lot like you. And what that does is it makes you really convicted in your opinion that I'm really, really right, because everybody around me agrees that I'm right. All my social channels and everybody on my social sites agree that I'm right. So I'm really, really right. And so, but then what happens when we're faced with somebody who disagrees with us? We say,
They're wrong. They're wrong.
You're wrong. Not only are you wrong, you're really, really wrong. And not only are you really, really wrong, you're the enemy. I can't trust you because you disagree with me. That's what happens. And inclusive leaders, here's how this is important, not just from a personal perspective, Dawn, but from a business perspective, is it creates this us versus them mentality within the workplace. If you can't have people disagreeing with each other and make it okay to disagree, you end up with this us versus them, and you don't get to benefit from the blending of those different perspectives, people who disagree, to find the right answer in the middle. And so from a professional perspective, inclusive leaders practice something called intellectual humility. And that's this, Dawn. Recognizing that we all have blind spots in our perspective, that we are not all knowing and omniscient. And so if we don't know all the answers and we're faced with someone who has a different opinion, we accept the fact that what we believe to be true might actually be wrong. And it positions us to be more open to differences of opinion. Intellectual humility, it's incredibly powerful, and it's used by the most inclusive leaders. And so that's the one answer on how you can do that to break out of your own social bubble. No, don't get rid of your friends. You love your friends, but be open to difference. The second thing in terms of how you can remove the shame, because it can be debilitating. I mean, it's really, really hard. And to be honest with you, I'm going to share a very vulnerable story in just a short amount of time that I can. When I took over my first large global role, Don, I was responsible for customers in the Middle East. And I had to onboard partners in the Middle East to help us extend our capabilities. Well, I had to travel there to make a decision. Leading up to the trip, I was really nervous. I had anxiety, but didn't know why. Once I got there, I met them. I was so pleasantly surprised. Their demeanor, their intellect, they were funny, they were kind, all the things I wasn't expecting. And then when I got to my hotel room, and this is hard to admit, when I got to my hotel room, I started examining, why was I so pleasantly surprised? What I realized is I had associated people with the Middle East with terrorism. And I realized I was racist. And I had to admit that to myself. And I felt so much shame because of all people, Dawn. Of all people, based on my background, how could I let that happen? Well, what I realized, being raised in the Midwest, I didn't actually know anybody who was from the Middle East. And I let my brain get filled with things that I've seen on TV, war-torn cities on TV, and just the bad relations that the U.S. had with a lot of countries and people in the Middle East. and I associated with terrorism. And so the guilt it was awful. And I realized if I was going to do my job, I had to somehow keep the bias from controlling my behavior. And otherwise, it would certainly seep out into the relationships and the work that I needed to build. And by accepting the fact that I was biased, recognizing it, I could be intentional about controlling my actions to make sure that I treated them and people like them equally the way that I did others. And so first, accept it, forgive yourself, but be intentional about the actions you choose. And that is the process you can take.
How do we influence others? They may be your boss, it may be your company, it may be your client, that you feel that they're not inclusive, and you want them to be more inclusive because you know it's good for the organization, you know it's good for your department. How do you take that role to move it up?
Yeah. One of the first things you don't shame and blame people into changing their beliefs. We've learned from that. Like as soon as somebody feels threatened because you're shaming and blaming them, their brain goes into this fight or flight mode. Like they're not going to be that open to hearing what you have to say. So what I recommend doing is basing it on the business case. You want to penetrate different markets. You need to increase revenue. You want to diversify your membership. What is the business outcome that needs to change? Do you want to be more innovative and use that outcome, the reason, to inform your inclusion strategy or, the influence you want to have on why people need to be more inclusive? Because you're right, we don't realize we under-include people as much as we do.
Question and answer came up, and it's one that you're going to love. How can we connect with Melissa? Melissa, we're almost done. It's the half hour in the world. How do we connect with you? What can we do to help you to get your word out more?
Well, thank you. Thank you for asking that question. It's an honor that you want to connect with me. I want to be friends. And so if you go to my website, melissamajors.com, there's lots of ways you can stay connected with me. You can sign up for my newsletter. You can buy the book. I think there are some links in chat Kate is going to put there if you were interested in buying the book. And so those are some of the ways to connect with me. But I also offer coaching and keynote speaking. So depending on how deep you want to get into this, you want to educate multiple people, or you want some one-on-one confidential advice, schedule some time so we can chat. I would love to help you. Talking about these things in public can be difficult, but having a safe space where you can talk with somebody who knows they're not going to shame you, it creates a psychologically safe space. And so connect with me in those ways.
It's interesting. Another question came through, and it really is no question, but just wanted to thank Melissa for sharing with us today. Great presentation, packed with examples that make us think, and exactly what we wanted to accomplish here. But I'm going to look at the chat for a second to see if there's anything else here that's it. I mean, this was great. Is there any parting advice that you can give us that can help us or help our organizations with inclusivity?
Absolutely. Embrace your bias. We all have biases. They're in all of you. If you have brain, you have biases, and they're shaped by millions of touch points we've had in our lives. When having these conversations and trying to influence, don't blame people, blame the brain. It's our brain that gets in the way. And I go much deeper in the book and things like that about how our brain gets in the way, but don't shame yourself. When you realize the extent to which your bias can influence your actions, don't shame yourself. Just find ways and learn how to treat others equally. That's what I would encourage you to do.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Melissa, thank you. Thank you, Betty Garrett, for introducing us to Melissa. Melissa, when I'm in Dallas, we're having dinner. We
Definitely.
are. You're going to be at that table.
Forward to it, my friend.
Okay, and great. Everybody, have a great week. We'll see you next week. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Take care.